Capital A, so that covers places like Eaton Canyon, which was my home base before the fire, Placerita, the Punch Bowl, 10 natural areas, 16 wildlife sanctuaries spread out across mostly the Antelope Valley and counting. It all adds up to about 6,200 acres. It's a lot of jurisdiction. And whenever any other parks need some assistance for their birds or some assessments, like Shabaram or Bonelli, they call on me. I'm the only biologist in natural areas. I'm the first, and I've only been on the job for 2 years. And considering last year was mostly dedicated to the recovery efforts of Eaton Canyon, it's been dynamic. It's been novel, to say the least. Most importantly, the county hired a biologist because they want resource management plans written up for each of the natural areas. So these documents that serve as these guiding principles of documenting what the resources are at each park, from the biology to the culture, the recreation, to then how do we want to manage it for like the next 30 years. So it's really far reaching in scope. And one of the best things about writing resource management plans is accounting for what are the resources. And that means conducting various surveys, and that's where I need your help. A team of one does not satisfy my ambitions. I have to recruit and train, and we go out into the field together, and it's a lot of fun. So for today's class, we're going to talk about a bunch of the local plants that we can find here at Placerita Canyon. I want to contextualize it within the ecology of Placerita and make it really grounded in the locality. At the most basic level, what is plant, right? What is plant? Well, we have 5 kingdoms, right? You can either be a plant, an animal, a fungus, bacteria, and I'm forgetting the other one. But in the plant kingdom, we are focused on a few key characteristics that stand out. One, it's a primary producer, meaning it produces its own energy through chlorophyll and chloroplast, through photosynthesis. Through the process of photosynthesis, it creates its own energy in chlorophyll, photosynthetic cells within these plant cells. Another key characteristic is that they have rigid cell walls made out of cellulose. When you eat a diet high in fiber, you're eating a diet high in cellulose, and your body cannot digest these cellular walls. So they this is what gives the plants their rigidity and their structure. From a little lupin to a mighty redwood, it's cellulose that helps those trees reach those heights. Plants are also defined by a vascular system in that they have xylem and phloem, which carries nutrients up from the roots into the leaves and also brings water up. I kind of like to think of it as like a freeway, a 2-lane freeway of nutrients going up and down the plant, and this vascular system supports that. And I bring that up because it's going to be relevant later in this conversation. Plants are also anchored into the ground by a root system, and their reproductive systems are defined by either using seeds and fruit, cones, spores. There's 4 major types of plants. We have our mosses, which are not vascular. We have our ferns, which rely on spores to reproduce. We have our conifers, defined by their cones for reproduction. And then we have our angiosperms, which are defined by their flowers for reproduction. And all of these photos were taken here at Placerita Canyon. Yeah, we have gorgeous Catalina lilies that like to pop up every once in a while. Why are plants so important? So I mentioned at the beginning, they are at the basis of production, primary production. They are pulling energy from the sun, they are pulling carbon dioxide out of the air, and they are producing oxygen and water, and it is the basis of the entire food web because your herbivores are eating the primary producers and your predators are eating the herbivores, and it just scales up. They also are a big part in pulling in that carbon dioxide. So every single plant, from a wee little lupin back to that redwood, is effectively a carbon sink, a carbon dioxide sink, a big well that's holding on to this greenhouse gas. And when you cut a large tree down, you are releasing that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. As the climate is changing, as our planet is warming, a lot of trees are stressed. A lot of them are struggling. And when we lose them, or when human activities mow down these forests, like what's happening in the rainforest, we're just pumping a lot of that CO2 that they've been holding back into the atmosphere, kind of accelerating the rate of climate change and the warming of the planet. Plants are so specific to Placerita Canyon because, I'm not going to block that, because one, they regulate water. The roots absorb water and also slow down water flowing through Placerita Creek. Here we have this gorgeous oak tree that's just on the other side of the nature center. A deeply incised little creek runs alongside it, and the only thing that is keeping this bank up is this fierce gnarl of roots built into that bank there. So they also provide soil stability. A lot of the past year for me has been defined by the recovery efforts at Eaton Canyon, and one of the things that happened right after the fire, 2 major storm systems hit in February and March. They hit slopes that were denuded of vegetation, where the roots themselves were also burned right out of the ground. So when these big storm surges came through, there was nothing in the ground to hold that soil in place as an amazing amount of water rushed through. So we saw a lot of erosion in Eaton Canyon after the fire. And you can see the effects of the fires here at Placerita from the 2016 Sand Fire and also from the 2004 Foothill Fire, hitting different parts of the park, but you can still see their impact. And what's really amazing is that because of these large oak woodlands that dot the canyon, a lot of the canyon's integrity was maintained, because these are essentially like architects on the landscape, or they're anchors in the landscape is what I mean to say. The plants here at Placerita also create habitat. One oak tree can contain an entire universe, essentially. There's studies that have been done that thousands, without exaggeration, thousands of species can thrive on one oak tree, from the bacteria and in the microverse, to the insects, to the wildlife that inhabit the bark and the canopy. Native plants, all of them provide food and shelter and nesting sites for our wildlife, whether they're burrowing under the ground, in the root ball, in the trunk itself in the cavity, or building nests in the canopy. And what's also really important for climate impact is that these plants also provide shade cover. So they have a cooling aspect to it. And wherever you have these shady, cool trees, there's also a sequestration of moisture with them. They're holding moisture in the soil, they're holding moisture in their canopy, and so it physically feels cooler and it's more humid in these spaces. Let's talk about plant structure really quick. This is just your most basic kind of diagram here, but it has the key players. We have our roots that are the anchors in the ground. The stems provide the structural support, plus that's also where the vascular system is, so the flow of nutrients and water is moving through the stem. The leaves performs photosynthesis, although there are some trees and plants that are green all over, and the stems will do photosynthesis as well. You'll know because they're green. The reproductive structures, there are different methods, as I mentioned previously, but in the example we have here, the reproductive structures are held within the flowers. And together, these structures reflect the adaptations to the environment, the disturbance, and life history of this location, of this space. When we talk about leaf morphology, there's a few things to keep in mind. The tip, or the apex, refers to the furthest point away from the stem on the leaf. The margin is describing the border. The midrib here is this central vein here, when then you have the rest of the veins branching off of it. The venules are like, think of them like tributaries in a stream. So they're just smaller veins branching off. The petiole is that term that Sandra was trying to think of, and me too, before this presentation began. And then you have your stem, and the axil is just a reference to the angle that the petiole hangs off the stem. And it won't be too much of a factor most of the times, but when you're on the field and you're trying to ID between 2 or 3 different subspecies, sometimes that axil and that angle is one of the only defining characteristics to help you figure out what you're looking at. This is just for absorption. You know, everybody here is going to walk away with a copy of this, so please use this as a reference. All I'm trying to demonstrate here is that there is an abundance in the diversity of leaf shape when it comes to plants. And what I think is fun is to start thinking about some of the plants maybe you know best and seeing what kind of shape they have, or even doing the reverse. You could take this out into the field and start looking at some of the plants and seeing what kind of shapes the leaves are. But the shape of the leaves are going to reflect how they adapt to light, high light, low light, how much water is available in the environment, and also heat. It's like the difference between a massive ficus leaf that you find in the rainforest versus the tiny needles of a cactus. Again, this is just mostly referential. There's also a diversity in leaf arrangement, and it's the same deal. I mean, this is a key trait in plant identification here. Leaf margins, they're often helpful in helping us determine between different species of plants. Here we have a model on the left-hand side, and then some demonstrations of what those actually look like in real life. Where is it? Serrate has the toothed edge. We can see that lovely toothed edge on the toyon leaf. Entire, meaning entirely smooth. Thank you, laurel sumac, for that example. And then spiny, where we have these little teeths here that are not as close together as would be kind of qualify as serrate. We can attribute that to our coast live oak. Also, there's leafination to consider. There is a whole abundance of how the veins are arranged within a leaf. And again, I bring your attention to the coast live oak when we're looking at pinnate, which is a reference to secondary veins coming off the midrib. Then we have palmate, which is beautifully demonstrated here with the sycamore, where the veins are branching out from one central space. And then we have parallel, which is brought to us by this grass here, this rush. It's not a grass, this rush here, where you can see that the veins are parallel with the leaf itself. This is also just for absorption. There's also leaf structure. What's really cool about Southern California is that our trees are subjected to a lot of light. And in the same way that we might put on a long sleeve shirt or put on sunscreen, these leaves are a reflection of how these leaves are exposed to UV and heat. This term gets thrown around a lot, glaucous. It is to describe plants that have bluish green color, and they're really waxy, and that's like essentially like a sunscreen against the UV rays. A lot of plants are fuzzy, and boy, there is a whole world of words, different words to describe fuzzy, hairy plants, from pubescent, like the underside of this mugwort, to villous, like the underside of this California cudweed, to who's another hairy individual? Here we have multiple characteristics going here. We do have these small hairs, but it doesn't lead to a soft texture. It's rough, scabrous, and we can find that on telegraph weed. So it's just a little sampling of the different types of leaf surfaces that you'll find out here. Oftentimes, you got to flip the leaf over to see why it was even categorized as such. Let's briefly go over the reproductive structures plants utilize. Yeah, we'll just jump right in. This is just a very basic diagram about flowers and fruits. What I want you to walk away is knowing the difference between stamen and pistils. Stamen are the male parts of the flower, of the plant, and that's where the anthers are contained, the male gametes. The pistil houses the female parts of the flower, and that's where the eggs are, where the ovaries are. And when the pollen pollinates successfully inside the pistil, those ovaries are fertilized and it turns into fruit. And then here's a beautiful demonstration of the vast diversity of fruit. And a lot of these you'll find in your grocery store, but a lot of these you will also find out here in the field. We have hollyleaf cherry that utilizes the drupe plan. The only difference between the cherries that you buy in the store and the cherries that you find out here is that the flesh is paper thin. You're scraping it with your teeth. Not that I would know. Acorns, nuts are considered fruit. Let's see, who else will we see? Rose hips. We have whole understories along the Placerita Creek that are made up of California wild rose. So you'll see the rose hips are the fruit. Mustard seed, an invasive on the landscape. Milkweed, essential to monarch butterflies. And we have species of sweet pea out here. Not sweet pea, we have a wild pea out here that grows on a vine. And what I really like about this diagram is that it shows you the same basic parts of the seed and the fruit and how it's shaped according to its category. And there's just such wild diversity. Oh, and I'll say one more thing. The shape of the seed, the fruit, determines its dispersal. With these seeds over here, cast to the wind. A lot of these seeds here with a lot of flesh, consumption, especially for like drupes. A lot of seeds have to pass through a digestive system in order for the surface of the seed to be scoured enough to release the internal material inside to break through. These seeds are really, really hard-coated, a lot of them. Especially like the plants that thrive in the wash, like mule fat. Its seeds get cast off either in the wind or a storm event, and they have to be dragged through the rocks of the wash to be scoured enough to germinate when they find a spot to settle in. Ah, cones. Look at that diversity in California. Now ignore it, because this is all we have. I am proud to present that we have a conifer here at Placerita Canyon, the glorious, the one and only Big-Cone Douglas fir. Now, a lot of the fir stands have been retreating since the 2016 sand fire. But if you hike up the Los Pinetos Trail, and you look to the east, you still see stands of those girls demonstrating their resilience. Let's talk about ferns. They use spores that line the undersides of their leaf material in a variety of different ways, either in little clusters or this glorious little edge here. These structures are contained within the sporangia, that's the reproductive material of the ferns, and they're very lightweight. They can be cast by the wind or more often cast through bodies of water. When it starts raining, they just get picked up with the water. I want to move on now to a different subject altogether. We're going to leave plant morphology behind and start talking about how we name plants. It's categorical. You know, we put these into families, genus, species. Oh, good. I had a notification here that didn't pop up here. So I thought I would highlight some of the more familiar families, the more common families that you see here at Placerita. We have the mint family, which can be defined by very aromatic stems and leaves. We also see, do we see it? Yeah, we also see bilateral symmetry, so the left side and the right side look the same. Members in that family is black sage and white sage, which are both belong to the same genus of salvia. And we'll go out into the field today, and we're going to very gently touch them, and we're going to feel the hairs, we're going to feel the glands. They're going to be sticky, and they're going to leave a beautiful aromatic residue in our fingers. The sunflower family is such an immensely huge family. There are tens of thousands of members within this family, and they all have a very interesting trait in common. They are flowers within a flower. People may look at this and initially think, oh, okay, yeah, that's the center, that's where the pollen is, and then these are the petals surrounded. But each one of these are subflowers that we call florets. Each one of these can be individually fertilized if pollen hits them. Each one of these large petals also whittles down to reproductive structures. So here is a slice here that shows you that cross section. So we have the little, yeah, that's right. This is called the disc florets, and these are called the rays. And I think that makes sense logically. And so you can see how each one of these is their own little independent flower. And you could see it in the California aster too. You could see it in our California mugwort. This is an amazing strategy that allows for very quick dispersal. When your flowers are this small, your pollen is even smaller, and it can just be uptaken like the wind and travel quite far if the winds are right. And then one of my favorite families is the beech family. It also includes chestnuts and my superstars, the oaks. And what's really cool about what's really cool about Placerita Canyon is that we have 3 different species on site. We have our coast live oak, which is the dominant oak on the landscape, Quercus agrifolia. Then we have canyon live oak, Quercus chrysolepis. And then we have our scrub oaks that you're going to find more in open, hot, arid spaces, usually associated with the chaparral and integrated quite well into that chaparral matrix. Meanwhile, the coast live oaks and the canyon live oaks form their own stands of woodlands, where each of these respective species, these 2 here, the individuals can grow well over 50 feet tall. What defines them as trees versus the scrub oak is that they form a canopy above your head. We never truly get canopy with scrub oak. It always remains this big, bushy, messy thing, and I love her for it. So let's break down the scientific names, the naming conventions for plants. Oftentimes, people will stick to a common name, but it's regionally specific or even really hyper-localized. And so if I were to talk about black sage here in Southern California, and then I were to go to Peru and talk about sage down there, they might also have their own black sage, but there's thousands of miles separating them, and they might not be necessarily related. And that's where scientific names come in, because they apply a universal standard that is used worldwide. And there's 2 parts. There's the genus and the species. The genus is the broader category, like all salvia, the sages, that's the genus. And then if we want to get more specific, like the individual plant within the group, that's where species comes in. And that means, for our black sage here, mellifera, which means honey bearing. Mellifera is derived from the Greek. It's the same root as the name Melissa. If you know Melissa, she's named after a bee. All right, there's a lot of text here, but I just wanted this to also be referential. It kind of breaks down to a very simple idea. What do plants need to thrive? The basics. Soil that is full of nutrients. That means nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the same building blocks that we need. You find these nutrients in fertilizer at grotesque proportions. They also need water. required for photosynthesis and for the nutrient transport in their vascular systems. Plants demonstrate how they use water species to species, location to location. You look at a cactus and you can see how they're using water in a very different way from, say, moss or ferns or willows that have their roots constantly soaking in the water. You also need favorable germination conditions. After the Eaton Canyon fire, we had plants that we hadn't seen in 30 years, since the last fire, the Kinaloa fire in 1993. I wish I was around here after the 2016 fire and the 2004 fire to see what kind of fire followers were hitting the scene. I bet that was a pretty interesting display. Some plants their seeds will stay dormant in the seed bank 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 20, 30 years, waiting for the right conditions to present themselves. The coast live oaks that I showed you, you know what those acorns need? Freezing. When they fall off the tree, they need a freezing cold winter. The ground has to get down to 32 degrees or close to germinate them. The pine cones, they require fire. Sometimes those cones are like a safe, and the fire, either the smoke or the heat is the right combination to just allow those cones to open up and deposit their seeds onto the ground. Or when they fall onto the ground, the smoke or the fire, the heat will help them open up. Sunlight, that's the most important part of they need it for photosynthesis. And plants are adapted to light in so many different ways. Many of our chaparral plants are in fully exposed sun, especially on the south-facing slopes. They're getting hit really hard versus the plants on the north-facing slopes. So even the aspect that these plants sit on determine how much sun they're going to hit. You're going to notice on north-facing slopes, they hold a lot more moisture, and that's where you're going to see a lot more of our oak woodlands and you're going to see more of the chaparral on our south-facing slopes. There's a lot of mitigating factors in that statement. If you're in low elevation and spaces here, you're going to see a lot of chaparral on the north-facing slopes. Oh, and of course, air. The carbon dioxide is essential for photosynthesis. Oxygen supports plant respiration, and it's this open airflow that is really required for a lot of our woody shrubs. They need open spaces to thrive in. Like toyon. Toyon does really well in these open spaces. So plants utilize different strategies to thrive based on the kind of disturbance that has been introduced to them. This is 3 months after the Eaton Canyon fire, and this is Coulter's Matilaha poppy exploding onto the scene. One thing I didn't mention about plant reproduction is that plants can also reproduce asexually. They can bud, or they can also extend rhizomes, and that's with the RH. And those are essentially horizontal ground-based stems, branches. They're not roots, and they can shoot these rhizomes out to extend their footprint, and Matilaha puppy explodes rhizomatically after fire. It's so aggressive, it's almost giving invasive. We have to be really on top of our management so it just doesn't completely take over and push out the other native plants and drive down our local biodiversity. So one of the strategies that plants have is, are they going to be a perennial? Are they going to survive through many, many years? Oh, are you raising your hand? Yeah, please.
So what is, I guess some of the characteristics of an invasive plant, but like by your definition, what makes a plant invasive?
I have a slide on it, but I'll talk about it now. So native plants are plants that we see here essentially before European colonization. The plants that have been here for at least 500 years through millennia. Invasives are plants that are not from here. They've been brought here accidentally or intentionally, and they don't live in harmony with the environment. They are generalists to a lot of our natives' specialist lifestyles. And generalists are too good at what they do. They need just a fraction of what the specialist needs to thrive. Like if our natives require rain to soak down 2 to 3 inches through the soil before they're finally ready to germinate. A lot of our invasives only need a ½ inch. So they just got this competitive edge, and they can dominate a landscape, push out the natives, and drive down biodiversity, and also really affect the health of the whole overall ecosystem. Non-natives, sure, they flower. Sure, bees and other organisms will pollinate them. But non-natives, the pollen literally doesn't have as much protein in it as our natives do. So they're eating lesser quality food. They're getting lesser quality nutrients. So it's depending on the landscape and how overcome it is with non-natives, it could be a real crisis. But there's intervention, and it's not all gloom and doom. And a lot of our non-natives are perennials. Tree tobacco, castor bean, they can live for years, while some non-natives are annuals, meaning their entire life cycle can be conducted within 1 year. And what I'm saying for non-natives, of course, applies to the natives as well. So some examples of our perennials, plants that can live for years or even decades, includes a shrub like sugarbush, Rusovata, or all of our trees here. They're a demonstration of what a perennial is. And so many of our perennials are so well adapted to fire on this landscape that if the fire temps are moderate or low and all the above portions of the plant are destroyed, as long as the roots are intact, you will see resprouting from the roots. It's one of the defining characteristics of plants that occupy these fire spaces, these areas that have fire mixed into the ecology for millennia. The annuals can also cope with that as well by having seeds that can sit in the seed bank that are resistant to fire or require fire to germinate. So like I said, their life cycle is completed in 1 season. Their whole game plan is rapid growth and rapid seed production, and they often dominate landscapes after disturbance. And a great example of that is our state flower, California poppy. They are fire followers. Another plant that is a fire follower is Phacelia, Encelia, whispering bells. The list goes on. And then there's also a unique exception with biennials. And so for the first year of the plant's life, they send all their energy down into making a nice big taproot to anchor themselves in the soil, meaning they probably live in a fairly disturbed environment, like maybe a dry wash that gets hit with seasonal storms. And then the second year will be dedicated to like flowering and seed production, and then she withers. And we see that example with our common mullein. Here's an example of a laurel sumac crown sprouting from the burnt former version of itself. The intensity of the fire was so low that the roots remained intact. This is a photo that I took at Eaton Canyon. 3 weeks after the fire, we got the gentlest mist of rain. And I kid you not, 3 days after that rain, the tiniest little plants were popping out of the ground. The tiniest little examples of California buckwheat were popping out of the ground. So this section of the presentation is going to be dedicated to plant adaptations. There are just so many unique ways that plants adapt to life in Southern California, and we see that here at Placerita Canyon. And so whether it's information for yourself or information that you want to pass on to like groups that you lead, I think this is a really enriching component to understanding the local ecology of the landscape. These are plants that are beautifully adapted to our local climate, soil, the fires, and disturbance. So a lot of our trees and a lot of our plants are drought tolerant. We're going to use this gorgeous coast live oak as a demonstration of that. Everything about an oak is built to hold water and endure fire. From deep roots that go burrow deep into the ground that can touch into the water table, to a canopy full of leaves that are very waxy, so it's hard for them to lose water. I didn't show a picture of it, but also think of a cactus. Those succulents, that's all water storage. And we have a ton of prickly pear cactus out here to give that demonstration. I already mentioned how They can be really efficient through using really waxy leaves to reduce transpiration, the loss of water through those leaves. And even though I have the oak here, Toyon is another excellent example of that. So leaves can come in a number of different ways to adapt to SoCal environments. They can reduce themselves and be teeny, teeny, tiny, like the chamise leaves there, or like a cactus. They also have a thick cuticle. It's like a waxy outer coating on them that also makes them more efficient at not losing water. They could also shed their leaves annually. Buckwheat has this beautiful period where after it blooms these beautiful white flowers, it goes scarlet red and then discards it. So it all goes into senescence. That's the term to describe when this period is over, when the active photosynthetic period of these plants is over. And then also, we have this close-up here of what white sage looks like. Can you guys see it? It's got those very fine white hairs that repel the intensity of the UV rays on those hot exposed slopes in the chaparral. Okay, so this is the oak woodland that is at Walker Ranch, which is the eastern part of the park. And it's hard to tell from this perspective, but every single one of these oak trees demonstrate a history of fire. They all demonstrate how they were hit in the sand fire. And so we see things like burn scars at the root level. We see cracks in the bark. We see bark that's peeled off. We see where the trees have burned, how the bark has healed over it, over these scars. And so there's many native plants that are dependent on disturbance. It's not all just negative when we talk about like fire or flood events. Oops. So the plants that are really well adapted to fire have very fast basal sprouting. That means they sprout very quickly from their roots as long as the roots weren't burnt. Their seeds germinate by some aspect of fire, either by the plant material surrounding them has been burnt down to its chemical components, or the smoke or the heat triggered germination. They have, a lot of these trees and plants have very thick bark to repel against the fire. Some oak trees have bark thicker than 3 or 4 inches. We have ponderosa pines. We have, even our big cone Douglas fir have bark that is so thick that the naturally occurring fires that would go through this place would have very little impact on them. What gets augmented in this system is that the fires aren't naturally occurring anymore. They're based on our actions. So for a various number of reasons caused by us, fires are either moving through the spaces at too high of a frequency, meaning these communities that were naturally adapted to them can't recover in time. 5 years is not enough time for a chaparral community to recover. They require 30 years. 10 to 30 years, but you get the idea. So if fires are hitting every 5 years, the community can't recover, the seed bank is getting burnt up, and so what we end up happening is something called type conversion, where the plants that can survive in these very disturbed areas do quite well. Insert the invasive plants. Insert short pod mustard. But you know, this environment, Placerita Canyon, is also defined by another disturbance factor, flood. When we get big storm surges, Placerita Creek is a chute of a lot of water and a lot of material moving through that space. It can be quite violent. And there's plants that are sticking it out in that violet interface. And when we have mule fat, they're very flexible, they're very bendy. So they'll just bend down under the crushing weight of the water, the sediment, or any other logs that bury it, and they will regrow after that burial. It won't slow them down. On our open, exposed, steep slopes, winds can come crashing down like a waterfall and really gain speed as they're moving down the slopes. And the brush out there is highly adaptable to those circumstances by also being really bendy and flexible, or creating root systems that anchor them firmly in the ground. And a good example of that would be our California sagebrush. This slide here shows the fire history in the vicinity of Placerita Canyon from the past 120 years. And you'll notice that it's a mosaic. These fire borders overlap. They don't stop at each other's footprint. And this here is a demonstration. This is the footprint of the sand fire in 2016. This here is the foothill fire. So the entirety of Placerita Canyon has been hit by fire. And this is a natural and a reoccurring process. And it shapes the oak woodlands. It shapes the chaparrals. It creates light, it creates space, it offers nutrients. When these plant materials are burned down, they become fertilizer for the seed bank that's waiting to germinate. And like I mentioned before, there's a lot of fire followers waiting for their chance to spring up in this environment. What we also notice is that very often a lot of the fire following plants are annuals, plants that do their entire life cycle within 1 year, because there's a really powerful strategy associated with being an annual. You have rapid germination, you have fast growth, you have high seed production, so you are available to take advantage of the nutrients that have just been very recently made available and could be very quickly washed away once a storm surge comes through. So these plants are operating on like all gears to get their biological output going. And the first column demonstrates a very common fire follower out here, Phacelia. Chia is the column here. It's Salvia. It's in the same genus as the sages. And then we have whispering bells here, one of my favorites. Essentially, annuals are built for opportunity. Because I had so many photos of the post-fire landscape of Eaton Canyon, a couple of these slides are biased towards there, but it serves the purposes for this conversation. Natives versus non-natives. And I think this is a good demonstration here, because what we see here are laurel sumac doing their glorious thing. They are crown sprouting. The fire did not burn too intensely through this space, so they're coming back with vigor. In fact, you can see one of the former mature laurel sumacs here. But all in the background, all in the foreground, we have invasive short pod mustard. And it's quite a competition upon the landscape. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. The difference between natives and non-natives. This is pulled from Placerita Canyon. You can see that we have, come on brain, sycamores and mugwort, but we also have a lot of star thistle, and that's a lot of this in the background. I now realize my words are a little bit in the way of that. Essentially, what makes a plant non-native is just, what makes a plant invasive versus non-native. That's what I'm trying to say. It's the relationship it has with the plants around it, the native plants around it, and its relationship with the landscape. What does my next slide look like? Perfect. So this is a massive field of short pod mustard, and they spread very aggressively. And in the case of a plant like short pod mustard, it's called allelopathic, meaning that it emits a chemical that excludes the production of other non-short pod mustards. So that's how you end up with entire monocultures, entire foothills covered in short pod, because they're emitting a chemical that has excluded anybody else from joining this space. And you can pull it out and the oil still remains in the ground. So mitigation can't just be pulling out the short pod mustard. It also has to be a mitigation of the soil, because we need to make the landscape suitable for the natives to return. But we also have allelopathic natives. California buckwheat. It behaves in the same way. You can have buckwheat totally dominate the landscape. And given a chance, they can go toe-to-toe, and buckwheat can win. Because mustard is an annual, so it's going to die back every single year, but the buckwheat is a woody shrub that's going to persist year after year. And with a little bit of intervention from us, we can help that.
I have a question with
Yes.
the mustard. You called it it short pod mustard. Is that a group of mustards or is that one individual species?
It is one individual species. It's Hirschfeldia incana, but there are other species of mustards. As mustards is just describing essentially the family is defined by the flower. You have 4 petals. They're generally yellow. We have Brassica is another genus. We have Cirsium. No, wait, not Cirsium. I'm forgetting it. But there are multiple species of Cecimbrium, that's it.
Well, the reason I'm asking because that mustard there, I've called it black mustard, okay? Is there a black mustard? Then Oriental
That's
mustard?
Brassica. That's Brassica nigra. And so
Is that a common mustard around?
it's very common. One of the easiest ways to tell if you're looking at short pod or black mustard, first of all, if I had a close-up, short pod is attributed to how small their little seed pods are. They are just much physically shorter in length than the seed pods that you would find on other species of mustards, but also it's a generalization. But short pod will come here, black mustard will be over your head.
Okay, that's good because like Walker Ranch, we've got mustard that's 7 feet tall.
Black mustard.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was right. They're up there anyway.
While many native plants are adapted to the disturbed landscapes of a post-fire landscape or a flood, the non-natives are very competitive. Like I said, they need that much less water, that much less sunlight, that much less nutrients in the ground to get in gear and start growing. And so they'll start growing. They'll have a head start of sometimes weeks or months because finally enough rain has hit the ground and the natives can start germinating. But what's happened? A canopy of invasives is now over them. So there's sunlight. The sunlight isn't getting through to the native layer. So they're pushing them out because of the chemicals they're emitting. They're pushing the natives out because they form this mat that prevents them from germinating. These stands can be so dense, and ultimately they reduce native diversity. And they can also alter fire behavior. When I said that there were many human-related causes to fire, this is one of them. In spaces that we disturb and allow non-natives to flourish in without any mitigation, these non-natives are not adapted to our local fire ecology. So when our summer droughts hit, they wither and shrivel and dry out. And then our winter rains come and grow more. So there's this cycle of plants drying out, creating fuel for when a fire hits, and then the rains come and creates more because they're growing from the seed bank.
Okay, another question, just because these are the things I teach docents, and I want to make sure I got this right. Brome grasses, they cover our,
Yeah.
Now, there's 3 types of grasses I were told were grown. I want to see. There's foxtail, wild oats, and ribgut. Are those brome grasses?
So the wild oat is avena.
Okay.
And it is different from the other bromes. So like the bromes, the genus is Bromus, and they're called in general the bromes. Avena describes the non-native wild oat, and there are some physical characteristics to tell them apart. Some bromes do get tallish. Bromus tectorum can maybe get up here and have some thick grass blades, but the way that the seeds are arranged on the seed heads, on the bromes it's bushy. But on avena, you have these alternate singular seeds coming off of the main stem. And it's, what is it? It's February? So I don't know. It depends what we see on the landscape. But avena is out there and the bromes are out there. So maybe when we go on our field trip, we can start keying out some of the differences.
So foxtail, that would be a brome.
That is a brome.
And ribgut?
Oh, well, you know what? Foxtail might actually be referring to a fescue, but don't quote me on it. Because
The things that get in your dog's nose, the fluffy little seed pods.
that could be a fescue, but there's also bromes that are utilizing the same strategy. Yes?
So we're talking about invasive plants, right?
Yes.
Is there a solution to that, or like,
It's not a one-stop shop. One plan doesn't fit all. So in the case of short pod mustard, it depends on the landowner. and depends on how they want to prioritize conservation or restoration. In LA County, every single year, crews go out and mow this down. And then they leave the material. They leave the seed bank intact. So it's an act of futility. They're always making sure that they're going to be busy every single year. Yeah, there's job security in that. A practical solution is what the CNPS, the California Native Plant Society, employs over at Eaton Canyon, and we're trying to deploy more broadly across the natural areas in LA County, specifically with something like short pod mustard. If it's already gone to flower, it means more work. But you'd have to cut off each flower head and bag it. And if it's gone to seed, same deal. Very carefully cut that seed head off and bag it. And then you can remove the vegetative material. But if it's the winter time and everybody's just green and hasn't gone to flower, rip it out. So the best time to attack a lot of these invasives is in early winter. Or I guess it depends on when the rains come, but associated generally with winter or early spring.
So if you disturb it while it has the flower, right, that just means we're spreading seeds?
It could mean that you're spreading pollen, and it could be facilitating fertilization for the next generation. It's always best to pull, you know? You just want to think about your strategy. And then also, and I'll get to you, Sandra. And then also, this is an entire landscape covered in mustard. We can't just leave it barren once we pull it, because what we've done is just created prime new real estate for recolonization of, guess what, the very aggressive mustards. So oftentimes, what should go hand in hand with a pulling effort is a mulching effort. Throw some natural mulch on this landscape because one, it's going to hold moisture. Two, it's going to reduce the temperatures, and it's just going to provide a little bit of a barrier between these aggressive seeds from regerminating. Sandra?
I'm just going to mention that Tree People does this. They have crowds of people, and you're probably all welcome to join them on weekends. Just look for Tree People online, and pulling out invasive plants. And then they wait and see what's sprouting and pull that out if it's invasive. And then they have planting and a little bit of mulch sometimes. And then, after they've planted, they have watering. And we're in places where there is no water, so they bring a water truck. And sometimes they have long hoses, and sometimes the hose is still on the reach, so people are carrying, you know.
It's a bucket brigade.
And each plant gets a half a bucket or a bucket of water. And you do that, and if you have wait, it's closed right now, but when it reopens, the area up by the St. Francis Dam, across the street from where the St. Francis Dam is, which is on San Francisco, there's a little road that goes off to the west. So you go down the equivalent of probably about 2 blocks, and you can see the older planting area, and as you go down that road a little bit more, you'll see the newer planting area, and then the beginning planting areas. And you'll see out here on our property, here at Placerita, those little flags in the ground, and that's where Tree People has helped us with some planting.
I just noticed it's just past 10. I'm only 2/3 of the way through this presentation. Is it okay to go a little bit further? Do people need to take a break?
About 10:30, so.
Okay, perfect. I think I can definitely wrap this up by then. Thank you, everybody, for championing through this marathon. Let's talk about the plant communities at Placerita Canyon. This is a map that I pulled from the CDFW. This map is from 2022, but the data might not necessarily be from 2022. It could be older. And I just want to show you the breakdown. This is at least establishes a baseline of what we can expect to see at Placerita Canyon. The majority of this space, 70% of this space, is occupied by chaparral. This is a chaparral dominant landscape. The greens are our oak woodlands. And then we kind of have this aqua color here. Those are the riparian ribbons within the oak woodlands. And I think this map,
There's
Pardon?
You gave us percentage on the chaparral.
Oh, you know what? I don't have that answer for you now, but I literally have the software that I use to tinker around with this open, and I can get those percentages for you super easy. The chamise dominates. Then we have the oak woodlands, and technically, that's the nature center. That's the botany trail, and all of this would also be oak woodland as well. And we're walking through the creek, and we have some more oak woodlands. Then we have some identified over here, annual grasslands, non-native grasslands. And then this fun little polygon here denotes those darling, precious big cone Douglas firs. Okay, so I already keyed out what are the representative communities on the landscape. What are these plant communities? They're essentially groups of plants that occur together under similar conditions. They're all shaped by the same conditions. The climate, the soil, the water, and the disturbance factors all play into this characterization. And they support a whole host of other organisms within these communities, from wildlife to microorganisms to fungus as well. So we're just going to do a little highlight of each of these communities. Let's start with the coast oak woodland. It is dominated by, you guessed it, coast live oaks, which provide a shaded understory. And so that means there's going to be limitations placed on the plants growing underneath because they're just not getting as much light. So oftentimes you'll see understories that are just composed of leaf duff, the leaves that they drop, or there's a little more light in the system and you have understories made up of golden currants, poison oak, and a whole bevy of wildflowers that reveal themselves during the spring and summer blooms. And it matters, this community matters so much because it contains the highest biodiversity within them in the canyon. Like I mentioned earlier, thousands of organisms rely on these species, on these oaks. These oaks serve as keystone species, meaning the success of the environment is dependent on their success. If they decline, the community declines. It's like I think of the sea otter. Think about the sea otter as that was the example I grew up with. You take the sea otters out of the environment, and then nobody's eating the urchins anymore, and they wreaked havoc on the kelp, and goodbye our coastal kelp forests. We say goodbye to these oaks for any number of reasons, either by fire or climate change or pests, and it's going to fundamentally change the landscape. But thank goodness they are so resilient. I mean, we've done studies out here, and I'll talk on it, but a lot of these oaks on the landscape are anywhere from a few decades old to 100 years old to even 200 years old. They're all about long-term. The riparian woodland that you will see along the Placerita Canyon Trail or also snaking through the oak woodland itself is defined by the plants you see growing along the streams. So that means their roots are generally wet, either in the stream itself or the water they're wet in the water table underneath. So these plants are adapted to the periodic flooding that happens in the canyon seasonally, to saturated soils, and to whole scouring events. And the most common species we're going to find in our riparian woodlands are going to be our beautiful sycamores, this layer here of the willows, and mule fats. So the key here is water availability, not elevation. And elevation becomes a factor in how some of the other communities are organized, like the chaparral. This photo was taken off the Los Pinetos Trail. We are looking east, and in the foreground here we have dense chaparral habitat, and we have steep canyon slopes going off into the distance, also showing chaparral. But there's a little secret in the center of that. This chaparral is so dense, it's well above your head. And I've spent my professional career doing vegetation surveys in chaparral, and it is work. This is thick, brushy stuff. It is strong. But there's resiliency in that. It provides a lot of nooks and crannies for wildlife to thrive in. And it creates a lot of space for light to seep through. So it might be very dense, but it's dense and like Swiss cheese. It's porous. The light gets through to the ground. And so little plants can still thrive in the understory of all this. Some of the most common species that we'll see out in the field is hoary leaf cenothis, hoary referring to how hairy and fuzzy the leaves are. Our sugar bush is out there, and also one of our oak species is out there, the California scrub oak. And the chaparral is built to burn and return, but that cycle is about 10 to 30 years, give or take how much rain there is, how much, or like drought conditions, or abnormally high temperatures. These can all slow down its recovery. And then I wanted to do a shout out to the big-cone Douglas fir, which is a relic stand these days. I wasn't here in the before time, so I don't know how vast these woodlands extended, but you can see the burnt stumps, the burnt trees left behind to give some indication of its former footprint. But what we're left is here. I'm going to just jump really quick. What we're looking at is here. This here is our remaining stand of big-cone Douglas fir. And if you look up the slope, you see a lot of them are dead. We have this burnt individual here that is also a big-cone Douglas fir in the foreground. And so we're looking at a changing landscape. These trees are incredibly long-lived with massive cones compared to Douglas firs up north. Because a lot of our, we have the biggest cone here west of the Mississippi with our coulter pine. Even our gray pine are pretty big too. And sugar pine is the longest. They can be like this, 2 feet long. They're remarkable. But these cones are still pretty big. And they're typically found at higher elevation, and they're found on northern-facing slopes more often because those slopes hold onto their moisture better. And so they're tucked into all of those nooks and crannies. Even though we're facing east, they're tucked into north-facing slopes. So like I said, the footprint was severely reduced in the 2016 sand fire. And recovery is difficult because the space is so remote and it's so rugged. It's not very feasible to go out there and conduct surveys on the ground to see if seedlings are popping out of the ground. So we're not going to know what recovery looks like for maybe another 10 years when we start seeing some young individuals pop out of the ground. And that remains uncertain. It is difficult for a small stand like this to recover under such circumstances. Drought is going to play a big part in their success and overall stress from the climate. And let us hope that there is not another fire for another 30 or 40, 50 years or ever, right? So what we have here is a demonstration yet again of Placerita's biodiversity. We have multiple species of oaks, and we even have a conifer that's generally associated with higher elevation present here in the canyon. It provides unique structure and habitat that is uncommon, and so there's going to be an uncommonness with the wildlife associated and with some of the community relationships associated with it. And it's also a demonstration to how sensitive these landscapes can be. The key takeaway from this is that I think the big-cone Douglas firs represent the ecological history and the lasting effects of wildfire on the landscape. And then those darn annual grasslands. We have this here. That green, that is defined by a lot of ripgut brome, the wild oat, and short pod mustard. We've been talking about them quite a bit today, and they just live as this these mixed communities all together. They represent past use. A lot of California was carved up for ranching or agriculture, and so the soil chemistry has been fundamentally changed from those past activities, and they also just demonstrate ongoing disturbance, because there's not a lot of mitigation going on out here. And if fire hits them again, that space again, it's only going to encourage more annual invasives to take over. I'm just going to put a little hot spotlight on the wildflowers at Placerita Canyon. Spring is approaching, and with that, a spring bloom that I'm crossing my fingers is going to be something quite substantial. They follow the rain. If the rain is early, they're here early. If the rain's late, they come late. We had some interesting bouts of rain in October, November, and December. And so I'm pretty happy to report that I took this photo of Goldfields on Sunday. Yeah, over by the Walker Ranch area. A very dense little patch. I was very happy to see it. There was also baby blue eyes out there, and the lupins are coming out like crazy, the phacelia, so they're here. And also these tiny little white flowers called popcorn flowers. What's really great, why I think they matter so much, is that they provide seasonal resources for the pollinators. So a lot of butterfly species are dependent on these, but not just the butterflies. There's also a lot of bees, bumblebees, and bee mimics. A lot of flies and beetles, unsung heroes of the pollinating world, are also relying on this explosion of nutrients on the landscape. They reflect rain patterns, they reflect climate change, and they kind of just offer us a snapshot, a moment in time of the canyon's seasonality, because what we're seeing now is going to be very different in March, April, and so on. And spring and blooms like to start in low elevation because they get warmest first after the rains. If you want to chase the spring bloom, start hiking uphill. And you'll see, you can chase this. I've chased blooms all the ways into July. Sure, it's in the Sierras at 10,000 feet, but you can chase them.
Have you seen Vasquez during this time of year?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Meadow where it glows.
The wetland, right? That little wetland?
That high meadow, and then it's just
Yeah.
goldfields, and
Yeah.
you've got like the rock just peeping up behind it.
It's magical. One thing that I haven't even talked about all the value and the takeaway and why this matters is the vibes are impeccable. There is a major mental health factor associated with all this grandeur and beauty. These pristine habitats, these pristine communities, give us an opportunity to bathe in them, and I genuinely believe it is good for our mental and physical health to occupy these spaces and to share that bounty with the community. Yeah.
Horse bathing is
Yes.
it's prescribed medicine in Finland.
There you go. Yeah, the Finns, they know what do. And I also just want to put the quickest little spotlight on narrowleaf milkweed because they are a really important plant for an endangered local species, the monarch butterfly. The monarch populations are down 95% from historical records. They're struggling, but they're still enduring. And we have narrowleaf milkweed scattered across Placerita Canyon. And we have milkweed scattered across all of Southern California. It effectively serves as corridors, pit stops, gas stations along their road trips between Northern California, between Northern North America and Mexico. But what's really cool about our Southern California population is many of them don't go all the ways down to Mexico. Many of them will just stay here. What's also really interesting is that we also have monarch butterflies that couldn't be bothered to make a pit stop. They don't feed once. So this milkweed isn't for those through flyers. And they're also bigger too. It's almost as if, since they're not going to stop and feed, they come with their own like larger reserve to get them through these thousands of miles. It's really fascinating. But they serve a really important ecological role because it's not just the monarch butterflies that thrive off of milkweed, but a number of associated beetles and bumblebees and other bees.
Well, if I want to support the monarchs, what's wrong with planting the showies?
What's wrong is that they don't bloom at the right time of year. And so it disrupts their seasonal migration patterns, and it makes them stay longer than they should in the area when they really should be moseying along.
Is there also some kind of like disease or parasite with the
You don't also know where your milkweed is coming from. A lot of nurseries are offering showy milkweed. It's a tropical milkweed, but it does just fine in Southern California. And you always want to stick as locally as possible when it comes to the genetics of your plants. For the further away you reach, the more risk is associated when you bring it into these landscapes. And so if folks are interested in helping their monarchy neighbors move through these spaces, think narrowleaf, Asclepias fascicularis. What's really interesting about Placerita Canyon is this living landscape that we all work, and recreate in. And I think this is a lovely demonstration of that landscape. We have our extent of our oak woodland on the left side. We have a planted garden space of coastal sage scrub, and then we have a riparian ribbon coming through here in the shape of a lot of willows and mule fat, all intersected by the Braille Trail. And so it just kind of like demonstrates how we can occupy this space with relatively low impact and just generate a lot of like education and beneficial utility from it. But these communities, these plant communities look the way they do for several reasons. I mean, one, we find ourselves in a Mediterranean climate, so we get relatively cool, wet winters and hot, dry summers. And our plant communities reflect that relationship to the land and the climate. As I mentioned, fire and disturbance are factors as well. Our past land uses, including Walker Cabin and the Walker Ranch family, they had an impact on this landscape. And so as a result of all these different factors, we have a mosaic of plant communities where we have natives alongside non-natives, and we have ongoing ecological change. So some things that you might notice while you're on the trail today or giving a walk with a group of students or recreationists is stay present and turn on all of your senses. What are you feeling? What are you smelling? What are you seeing? And what are you hearing? And you can use your senses to help you explore the canyon. Whether you're walking through the canyon trail to get to the waterfall or you're walking up the Los Piñatos trail, what's the vegetation that's surrounding you? What direction are you facing? What's the aspect of the slope? And where's the water? These are all kinds of details that you can consider as you weave the kind of narrative you want to share with yourself or with others. You can also observe the seasonal shifts. The canyon is so gloriously dynamic, different seasonally between winter, spring, and summer. And I think it's also impossible to notice the dispersal of natives versus non-natives on the landscape. All of these are folded together that tell a very rich tapestry of what Placerita is like. Placerita can even serve as a microcosm for describing the dynamic ecological changes that we're seeing and more broadly in Southern California. This is a demonstration of why plants matter so much. They help guide, they support wildlife and pollinators, and so I threw together a lot of pollinators here to show you the diversity. It's not just bees and butterflies, it's flies and wasps and beetles also are really important pollinators on the landscape. These plants matter, these communities matter so much because they inform us on how we respond to fire, how we respond to disturbance, and how we want to manage these spaces for posterity. You know, you want to manage a chaparral quite differently from an oak woodland. All right, so now I'm going to take a sidestep to talk a little bit more about the work that I've been doing with a lot of the docents here back in 2024. 25 was a skip year because of the fire, but I'm back. So we engaged in a pretty large-scale tree health monitoring survey. The trees are so long-lived and they're slow to recover from stress. So if we start monitoring their condition and their health, it can inform us on how maybe the climate is affecting their health or how other human causes are affecting their health. And it might inform county management on how we want to proceed in protecting these spaces. So what we did is we conducted these surveys. We used paper, good old-fashioned paper, data sheets. I'm actually going to try to digitize it for this upcoming season, but we'll see about that. We documented a whole bunch of characteristics like how tall is the tree, what species is it, what's its DBH, diameter at breast height, and a whole bunch of other conditions like how thin is the canopy, is it show any signs of disturbance like from fire or pests. We measured all these things and put it into a big data sheet. And the idea is that this will help inform our long-term management plans. We just did a survey in 24. We're going to do one this year. It doesn't have to be every year. Once we start establishing a baseline or a pattern, these could be surveys that we conduct every 3 years, every 5 years. I don't know. It also depends on the interest of the community, you guys. Yes?
I've seen tags on the oak trees. Some of them are silver.
Yes.
Some of them are blue. Are they both yours?
Yes, they are.
What do they mean?
I'm going to show you. So, we tagged 226 trees. There's the nature center. So in the immediate vicinity, we tagged all these trees. And what we learned, here's a what. You can see the breakdown. All the green represents coast live oak. You're going to see some western sycamores scattered through here in orange. And then we also got some other trees and more, really, to be fair, shrubs as well, including sugar bush, but we also got like the one Fremont cottonwood and a few willows along the way. So what we did is we took all the data that we collected and we fed it into an algorithm, right, where all the data was weighted. And they're assigned a score where the lower the number, the worse, it was worse shape, right? Yes, 1 equals poor. Yeah, 1 equals poor, 5 equals good. So each tree got a number of factors rated on this scale. And we took that and we put it into this algorithm where effectively the output is the equivalent of a golf score, where the lower the number, the less stress the tree appears to be in, or the healthier it appears to be in. And so what I want you to take away from this color system here is all the trees that are green. There's a lot of healthy trees in this space. But where do we notice stressed out trees? We notice a lot of stressed out trees in the oak picnic area. We notice a lot of stressed out trees at the interface of the chaparral to the south, and a lot of stressed out trees along the Disney property. And there could be a number of factors explaining why. A lot of the trees are old, or they could be subjected to stress from the fire. They could still be reeling from the fire from 20 years ago. Or there could be pests. And so I bring up this. I wanted to put a spotlight on the gold-spotted oak borer here at Placerita Canyon. The gold-spotted oak borer, also known as GSOB, is an invasive pest from Arizona and northern Mexico. So it's our neighbor. And it also lives in oaks from that area. What it's done is it's come through San Diego and has been making its way steadily north. We now find it as far as Ventura County, and it is here in Placerita Canyon. I'll show it in the next slide, but I have a map that shows its extent in the immediate vicinity. What's really troubling about GSOB is that it attacks healthy, mature oaks. It seems to be really focusing on coast live oak, canyon live oak, and black oak. Black oak isn't present here, but it is present in the broader landscape in Santa Clarita. And so what's really tough is that remember that vascular system I brought up, where the nutrients are brought up and down through the xylem and phloem? What this gold-spotted oak borer likes to do is the female will come along and she'll lay an egg on the bark. Then that little critter will hatch and burrow through the bark in a hole so small you cannot see it. And then it's gonna chew itself out a little cavity, what we call a gallery. And it just happens to live in that interface where the living tissue is, what we call the cambium. And that is where the xylem and phloem reside. So 1 GSOB, not that big of a problem. But what happens is that little individual matures, burrows out of the bark, and then climbs up the tree and lays an egg. And so these GSOB will start low and will work up a tree up to 10 feet, up to 15 feet. Multiple generations of GSOB can occupy a tree. Sometimes the only signs of GSOB that we can detect are its exit holes. which are in this perfect little capital D shape, like a half circle. What we also notice is that there are thinning tree canopies associated with GSOP, because what they're effectively doing is girdling the tree from within side. If you're cutting off its vascular tissue from the inside, you're effectively eliminating its opportunity to deliver nutrients and water up and down it. So these trees are resilient. Some of them are enormous, but if they're heavily infested enough, they can and do kill oak trees. There are some patches in San Diego County where 90% of the oak woodlands are obliterated by GSOB. And they're here. We recently did a GSOB survey with the help of the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Department. And I should also do a shout out to our forestry division. We have an invasive pest management unit made up of 2 people. And so each one of these correlates with a tree that they have surveyed looking for evidence of GSOB. Green, nothing found, but red, yes. I was with Wen, that's the person I'm talking. I was with Wen when we discovered that tree, and then some of the people here were with Wen when he discovered GSOB in these trees over here. And then in the larger regional context of the immediate area, this is Whitney Canyon. And this is 9/10 of a mile as the crow flies to the canyon. Fortunately for us, we have a big ridge line of chaparral between us to buy us some time, but they're already in the park. There's also GSOB present at Rice and East Canyon as well. So they're in the area. And it's one of the things that we're trying to do is set up a monitoring program. Okay, we found out, now what do we do? What we do is that we're going to have a coordinated effort between the forestry and the pest management specialists to specifically target the literal handful of trees that are showing infestation of GSOB. We can take care of those trees, but then it's up to us, the community, to check all the rest of the oaks in its community for signs of GSOB. And this is something that we should do annually, because we can only rely on the physical signs of these insects as they exit. Now, simultaneously, as I'm talking about this, there is a group of students from Cal State Long Beach, my alma mater, Go Beach, who are in a remote sensing class. So they are currently in the works of getting a permit so that they can fly a drone that has multispectral imaging capabilities. They're going to fly it over the canyon at Placerita. They're going to fly it over Marshall Canyon, and that they're hoping that they can pick up signs of stress in the canopy hopefully sooner than we can detect it with our own eyes, which is quite a limiting factor.
How do you get rid of them if you find them?
So I'm going to list a handful of things, but it is not a one solution fits all. Every single tree is case specific, which is so tough. It's easy here in Placerita Canyon because all we have to think about are 5 trees, but over in Marshall Canyon, which is like the San Dimas area, Marshall Canyon has 2,000 trees. So far their team has surveyed a little over 230 of those trees. 41% of those trees are infested. It is a catastrophe over there. And we are not going to wait for a catastrophe to unfold here at Placerita Canyon. This is at such the early stages, we can do something effective in our mitigation of this pest. And what is that? It's a number of things. If the tree is too far gone, if we call them amplifier trees. That means if we see more than 25 exit holes out of the tree, there's a correlation associated with that the tree is generally a goner, and it is also a hot spot for GSOB dispersal. So sometimes, not always, the easiest thing to do is just to cut the tree down and remove it from the site. Because you have to ask yourself, is it worth saving one old tree if it has the potential to infect the rest of the community? That's not always going to be the solution, but it's an option. There's also systemic Pesticides. You literally drill a hole into the root of the tree, and you get a little capsule that is filled with a pesticide called imicide, and you put it in there, and like gravity, by gravity and the vascular system, it uptakes that pesticide and it kills the G-sob larvae that are living in the cambium. There are caveats with systemics. The tree's vascular system has to be healthy enough to even uptake the pesticide. Also, the tree itself has to be juicy enough. You can't do this in the middle of the summer. You can't do this during a drought. You have to do it after the rains. So the best time would be March. So right now, the county is all hands on deck for Placerita Canyon. I don't want, for Marshall Canyon, but I don't want Placerita to be overlooked. So I'm going to be talking to Wen ASAP within the next couple of weeks to get a plan formulated so that we can approach this with thoughtfulness and with time still on our side. Another method is also to spray the bark itself with a topical pesticide. And there's a little bit of loss associated with that. But again, you have to ask the question, what is the priority here? To save an entire community or one infested tree? I don't have the answers. It often depends on group consensus, stakeholders weighing in and coming together on what the best plan forward is. There is also a number of screens that you can physically put on the trees to trap any emerging G-sobs. So systemic treatment to get the larvae inside the tree. Tree spraying to get the eggs or any G-sob that might touch the tree. And then wrapping with plastic or with like screen meshes to catch any G-sobs that might emerge after their larval stage. There's like a number of things that we can do. And once you find trees that are contaminated and you're cutting them down, you have to chip that material down to less than 2 inches to ensure that you've mulched up the G-sob in it as well. Or you solarize it and you cover it in a big tarp and weigh it down to make sure all the edges are secure as a tight seam. And then you let that tree sit there for 2 years so that it can be seasoned. And you know for certain that the G-sob that emerge are going to die. And that's why it's so important to buy firewood that is local and also seasoned, because that's the number one way that this G-sob is transmitted from location, by people moving infected firewood around. Imagine if we went camping in San Diego County and like, oh, look at all this available oak tree. Let's make a fire. Oh, we can't, let's not waste it. Let's take it back home with us. It's as casual as that. Oh yeah, that's right. I already showed this one. And so I think we're just about to wrap it up. Thank you so much for your attention spans. Why does all of this matter? Well, all this information arms you with confidence, you know? It helps you understand Placerita's plant communities, how they function. It gives you a larger picture when you fold in the ecology and the climate into this. And it helps you recognize how native plants support wildlife and healthy ecosystems. It also enhances the visitor experience. The more information you can share, the kind of story you weave is the impression that you're going to leave on potentially a first-time visitor. You'll also be supporting conservation awareness, whether you're talking about why oak trees are so important to save or why we should be looking out for G-sob. And also, there's a skill associated with this. You're learning new species, you're learning their functional relationships with each other, and that's really cool stuff. All right, so we're going to take a break. And then after that, we're going to head outside for a hike. Let me wrap it up by saying thank you very much for the time that you've given me to talk today. If you have any questions, please ask now, or you could also email me if you so desire. And if you're interested in volunteering or learning more, hit me up. We're going to be doing surveys this season, and I want you guys there. Thank you.